raised stem stitch band is our stitch number 17. And here it is. I really like the texture of the stitch. It has sort of a pattern within itself, which I really like. And you can stitch it in a single color, use multiple colors as I've done here. Or you can try a variegated thread, which gives it a stripy look, which I really like. As you can see, it's works well both in a straight line and on a curved shape, although the curvy shape does give some challenges, but we'll talk about that in a moment. So to start the stitch, usually you have drawn 2 parallel lines. You can do it without drawing the lines, of course, but it is helpful to keep the stitches the same distance. So you start by coming up from the back, and then you make a stitch across the area between the 2 lines, and then you make a stitch going the opposite that is parallel to the first one, and you make a third one that is parallel to the second one. And you keep adding this ladder of stitches until the whole area is filled in. I don't think there's any rule per se about how far these stitches should be from each other. You can experiment and see what difference it makes if they're closer or further apart. If they're further apart, then the next step will, the stitches will look longer. Right, so let's just get this thread out of the way. For the next step, you can of course use the same color as the base layer. I'm just using a different color to make it easier to see what's happening. So you come up just outside of the first stitch, and then you pass the needle over the first 2 stitches, and then you insert the needle under the second stitch. You do not pick up the fabric, just slide it under that second stitch. And pull it tight. And then you pass the needle under the next stitch and pull the thread tight. Pass it under the next stitch in the ladder. And you keep going like that until you reach the end. And then you insert the needle back down through the fabric. Now if this was a long section, I would probably tie the thread off on the back and then come back to the start, but I'll just pass the thread onto the back. So now I come back up where I came up before, or rather I'll come up just above it, and then I repeat what I did before, pass over the first 2 stitches, and then pass the needle back under the second one and pull my thread taut. And then I pass the needle under the next step in my ladder, and under the next one. So I keep sort of going backwards. We go backwards to go forwards. And you want to try and push these rows of stitches down so that they sit right next to each other, so that you don't have any gaps between them. And you simply carry on doing this until you have filled the whole shape that you're working on. So let's just do this. So you can see how it's starting to build up, giving this raised effect. Now let's have a look at working it on the curve of the Q that is in our sampler. So stitching the stitch on the straight area is no problem, but when we get to a curvy area like here, as we have on the Q, you will need to make the ladder stitches at an angle. Along these 2 sections here, it's not such a big problem because the curve is wide, but up here and down here, and especially down here, you will need to space some of the ladder stitches quite close together. And you may want to start right at the edge here. And you can see if I did the stitch parallel to the first one, then it would be at a funny angle. So I will basically have to come down right in the same hole where I did that first stitch. And then the next one is going to come right next to it. So that I'm trying to follow the curve with straight stitches, which is always a bit of a challenge. And you notice that I'm doing the stitches in the same direction from the outside to the inside instead of going back and forth. But that's because I don't want to risk unraveling any of the stitches when they're so close together. So now it's starting to widen out a bit, and my stitches don't have to be so close together anymore on the inside curve. So this is sort of what you want to do the base layer. Now let's have a go with the second layer. Let's just secure the thread. So you would be working in this direction, or if you're left-handed you can work in the other direction. So let's try and do the outside first. Right, so I have come up just outside my first stitch, so I skip these 2 stitches and then I go back under the second stitch, and then I come under the next stitch, under the next stitch again, and I keep pulling my thread so that it's nice and taut. And then we keep going until we get to the end. Right, so that's my first pass finished. So I'm going to pretend like I have filled in all of it apart from the last couple of goes. So let's try that, because this is where it gets a little bit tricky with the stitches that are very close together. So let's do a pass here. It's going to look a little bit loose because there's nothing holding it in its place. Right, so let's have a look here. So let's do another pass. So where these 2 stitches are very close together, it may actually look sort of weirdly thick if you do both of them. Like they're sort of bunching up together. Let's have a look and see what it looks like. Maybe it's not too bad. But you can see, because there is not the same distance between the stitches, they sit a lot closer together. If you compare to these stitches here and these ones here. So let's do the last row. So now I'm at the point where the stitches are really close together, and I think what I would do at this point is simply skip a stitch. So instead of going under the next stitch that I'm encountering, I'm going to ignore that and go under the next one after that. So that the stitches along here look more similar to these in size. And again for the next one, so this is the next stitch I'm encountering, but I'm going to skip it and go under the second one. Like that. And then I'm going to go under the last one, of course, to finish it. So when you are at these points, both at the bottom and the top, but especially here, because the curve is sort of cut in half because of this line here, maybe the last 2 rows you want to do what I just did, where I skipped the stitches to make the stitches look longer. It's a little bit difficult to see, but that is what I have done here. So that these stitches, because there's a big difference in the length between the distance between the ladder stitches on the outside and the inside of the ladder stitches, and you want it to look maybe not exactly the same length, but similar length at least. The tutorial you have just watched is part of a series of 31 stitch tutorials that I have made to go along with the pattern for this embroidery stitch sampler. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. If you want to check out the pattern, you can find the link in the description. And whatever you're making, happy stitching.